Welcome to boring history for sleep, the strange role of the village. Alewife tonight's sleepy stroll through medieval brewing, mild gossip, and very questionable hygiene. Hey guys, tonight we slip through the crooked timber gates of a medieval village, not the kind with kings and jousts and glamorous doom, but the kind where your boots squelch in something suspicious and your nose twitches at the sour temps of fermentation in the air. That scent, that's ale, and odds are it was brewed not by some mustachioed monk or dusty merchant, but by a woman, specifically an alewife. You're headed straight for her hut. The door is slightly ajar, the chimney burps out smoke that smells a bit like burnt porridge and yesterday's regret. Inside, it's warm and sticky, with barrels crowding the dirt floor and a huge copper cauldron bubbling like a witch's stew. Don't be shy, duck your head. Mind the broom hanging low from the rafters, and let your eyes adjust so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here to learn about a job that's a little bit domestic worker, a little bit chemist, and a surprising amount of social rebel. The village alewife is usually a widow or older spinster with a nose for hops and no patience for nonsense. Her livelihood comes from boiling barley and water into something mildly intoxicating and temporarily safe to drink, a miracle. Frankly, in a world where even the well water might kill you, it's a full-body affair. You watch as she stirs up thick mash with a wooden paddle taller than you are, sweat slipping down her temples into the steaming grain. A cat winds around her ankles, maybe because of mice, maybe just for show. On a shelf by the wall, dried herbs dangle upside down, some for flavor, some for healing, and one or two, she swears, will keep your bowels from betraying you. The brewing starts early and ends late. There's no refrigeration, no fancy equipment, just heat, instinct, and a touch of superstition. She tastes the wort with a frown. Too bitter. A pinch of ground ivy goes in. You ask why, and she shrugs. Because it works. You won't get more than that. Brewing, in this era, is part recipe and part ritual. Historians still argue whether this early female dominance in brewing was out of practicality or cultural necessity, maybe both. The truth is, beer was a household staple, like bread or soup, and making it fell under the wide and heavy umbrella of women's work. Only later, when it became profitable, did men swoop in with tall hats and commercial ambition. Still, back in this smoky little room, it's women who rule the foam. The alewife brews in batches, then hangs out a twig broom over her door when the ale is ready to sell. That's not a witch thing yet. It's just medieval marketing. Can't read. Look for the broom. You learn quickly that she doesn't just make ale, she lives ale. It's her coin, her standing in the village, her leverage in disputes. Someone says her barley's gone bad. That's not just a culinary insult, it's an accusation that could destroy her business, especially when ale is one of the only things safer to drink than water. Seriously, in this era, if you're not sipping ale, you're playing a risky game of gastrointestinal roulette. She pours you a cup of warm, cloudy draft that smells faintly of bread crust and hope. It's not strong. This isn't party juice. It's keep your kids hydrated without killing them juice. Ale like this, called small beer, was consumed by everyone, including children, 3 to 5 times a day, and it's cheap, or at least it should be. The price of a pint might rise after a bad barley harvest or a string of rainy days, but the village expects its alewife to keep things fair. If she cheats, dilutes the batch, overcharges, shortens the cup, she find herself face to face with the altister. Yes, that's a real job. And no, it's not as fun as it sounds. The altister is usually a man appointed by the local lord or guild. He wanders from brew hut to brew hut, sips samples, and slaps down fines if things aren't up to standard. Our alewife rolls her eyes when she talks about him. Hasn't had a clean palate in years, she mutters, pouring him a half cup when he arrives, pretending to be courteous while watching him like a hawk. Still, she plays the game because brewing is her independence. She doesn't need a husband to own a cauldron. She doesn't need a son to haggle at the market. She's got barley, yeast, and the fire in her hearth. There's something quietly radical about that. In a world where women are often invisible in the records, referred to only as wife of or mother to, the alewife stands out. Her name might be scrawled on the village ale register, or even mentioned in complaints to the manor court. Yes, she's breaking norms, and yes, some villagers grumble. But when the ale runs out, everyone comes knocking. You sit quietly in the warm half-light of the brew hut, the scent of yeast thick in your nose, the fire snapping like it's telling secrets. You sip slowly, and the alewife stirs, and the world outside keeps turning. Because as long as someone needs something safe to drink, something comforting, familiar, and just a little bit fizzy, there'll be a woman here, apron tied tight, broom hanging high, waiting with a cup. The cat watches you from the rafters, not curled up on a windowsill like a fairy tale mascot, but perched like it owns the house. It probably does. You glance again at the cluttered table, dried rosemary, an iron ladle, and a battered wooden spoon polished to a shine from years of stirring mash. Over in the corner, a heavy broom leans against the wall like a guard on duty. The alewife picks it up casually as she moves toward the door, and that's when it hits you. She really does look like every storybook which you've ever seen. But there's no spellcasting here. This is just her daily uniform. Still, you can't help noticing how many innocent brewing tools double as props straight from a grim folktale. The cauldron, standard issue. The broom, used to sweep, sure, but also hung outside to announce fresh ale, sort of like turning on the neon open sign. The cat, unofficial mouse patrol, but definitely a bit judgmental. The overlaps are uncanny. The truth is, centuries later, those brewing symbols would morph into witchy cliches, thanks in part to rumor, fear, and maybe a dash of medieval misogyny. But for now, in this village, they're just tools of the trade. She dips a finger into her cooling wort and nods, satisfied. You ask if she ever measures the temperature. She snorts. If you can hold your hand in it for the time it takes to sing a psalm, it's ready. That's the science of it. Alewives learned through feel, smell, and rhythm. Brewing wasn't taught in books, it was passed through gossip, intuition, and stubborn repetition. Modern historians still debate how standardized these methods really were. Some claim they followed consistent ratios and methods. Others say it was barely more than educated guessing, flavored by luck and weather. As she opens a wooden chest, to reveal linen-wrapped bundles of dried hops. She mutters something about how those German monks ruined it all with their precious hop laws. You blink. Did she just throw shade at the Reinheitsgebot? Possibly. You learn that hops weren't always the go-to bittering agent. Before them, ale was flavored with gruta, heady, herbal mix of everything from yarrow and mugwort to wild rosemary. These herbs didn't just flavor the ale, they carried reputation, mystery, and medicinal claims. Aphrodisiacs, maybe hallucinogens, possibly contraceptives. Historians still argue whether some alewives deliberately used certain herbs to curb fertility in a time when other options were, well, non-existent. And this was where suspicion started to creep in. A woman brewing potions in private, whispering to plants, manipulating mood and body with her drink. It doesn't take a suspicious mind long to twist that into something darker. Still, here in her smoky kitchen, there's nothing sinister, muscle memory and a daily hustle. You watch as she lifts the spent grain from the pot with a grunt and dumps it into a trough outside. The pigs come running. Nothing's wasted. You ask about her neighbors. She waves vaguely toward the other end of the village. Marta brews, too. So does old Henna, though hers always smells like cabbage. Competition is real, but it's not always fierce. There's room for more than one alewife unless someone steps too far out of line. That's the thing about medieval village dynamics. You're tolerated until you're not. As long as your brew is good, your price is fair, and your cat doesn't hex the mayor, you're golden. But one rotten batch, one customer with a bellyache and a vendetta. Suddenly your broom looks suspicious. Your cat looks ominous. Your brew poisonous, maybe, and the whispers begin. One neighbor says she saw you talking to the woods. Another claims your ale keeps the men to marry. A third swears your hands moved in a strange circle over the mashed dot. You might think it's just petty gossip. But in a world where plague, famine, and failed crops need someone to blame, a woman with a bubbling cauldron is dangerously convenient. Still, she shrugs off the talk. I just make ale, she says, and most of the time they thank me for it. And really they do, especially in winter, when water freezes and fires flicker low. A warm mug of ale soothes sore muscles, dulls hunger, and wraps your bones in something that almost feels like comfort. It's not escape, it's survival. Brewed slowly over time, you peer closer at a shelf of strange items. A carved spindle, a dried toadstool, a linen pouch that smells faintly of peppermint and something earthy. You ask what it's for. She smiles and says, my grandmother's cure for a sour belly. Works better if you don't ask what's in it. You don't. She pours another mug, this one thicker, darker, stronger. Not for children, this one. It's for men who've been out hauling timber, or for neighbors mourning a loss, or for travelers with stories to trade. This is when the alewife's cottage becomes a gathering place, a pub before the pub. There's no tavern license, no bar stools, just benches, mugs, and laughter. And if someone cries into their cup, well, that's allowed too. You sip, and it's not delicious, exactly, but it tastes like belonging, and maybe that's enough. Out in the yard, the cat stretches, watching the sunset through half-lidded eyes. The broom now leans outside the door, signaling to the village the ale is ready. And inside, the alewife wipes her hands, sets another log on the fire, and readies herself for another long night of quiet, unsung work, her hands shaping comfort. From grain and flame and time, evening has settled thick and slow over the village. Chimneys puff like tired lungs, and the air smells of peat smoke and old stew. Down one of the muddier lanes, you hear the clink of a mug and a burst of laughter. It leads you back to the ale, door still cracked open, broom still propped beside it like a crooked welcome sign. You step in, and the warmth hits your face. The hearth glows red, the brew bubbles low. The cups are lined on the shelf, drying, waiting, and that's when you notice something odd. A thin strip of parchment is pinned above the doorframe. On it, a hand-drawn symbol, a sheaf of barley crossed with a spoon. You ask her about it, and she sighs. Official notice, she says, means I've paid the Lord's tax this month. Means I'm allowed to sell, for now. Turns out, in the tangled web of medieval bureaucracy, even brewing ale could be a legal minefield, especially for women. Brewing was technically a trade, and trades were often regulated by guilds, which were overwhelmingly male. That meant alewives walked a narrow path, allowed to make and sell, but rarely permitted to expand, unionize, or, succeed. Too visibly still, she complies. She registers with the local ale canora man, whose actual job is to taste beer for a living. You think that sounds like the dream, until you see him, red-nosed, belching, slightly cross-eyed. He staggers into the brew hut, unannounced, slurps from her freshest jug, then declares, acceptable, before hiccuping on the way out. You both watch him leave. Delightful, she mutters. That'll be another penny next week. Historians still argue whether such enforcement helped maintain quality or simply padded the pockets of local authorities. Either way, brewers especially, female ones, were expected to juggle the rules while stirring the mash, and the rules kept changing. One year, ale must be sold at a fixed price. The next, you're fined if your cups are slightly too large. Another year, the local lord declares a ban on grute herbs because, surprise, hops are now the holy grail, and you've got to buy them from his estate. Convenient, right? But more than the written laws, the unwritten ones trip you up. She can brew, as long as her ale doesn't outsell the baker's bread. She can pour for the village. But not if too many men start spending their wages in her kitchen instead of at church. She can laugh with customers, unless one of their wives complains. In other words, she can exist, just not too boldly yet. She persists. Tonight, a few neighbors stop by. A shepherd with a limping dog, a midwife with ink-stained fingers. They trade gossip, sip slowly, speak in murmurs. The alewife listens more than she speaks. She tops up mugs, nods at tales of missing chickens and an angry goose that's taken over the church steps. It feels harmless, even cozy. But here's where things get serious. In this little hut, amidst laughter and livestock tales, local politics are brewed right alongside the ale. Decisions are floated. Favors are promised. A rival's name is spoken, a deal whispered over steam. The alewife is more than a vendor. She's a quiet broker of information. She knows who's pregnant before anyone else. She knows whose field was mysteriously set afire, and she definitely knows who's skimping on their barley tithe. And yet, despite her influence, she has almost no protection. If someone accuses her of watering her ale, she could be pilloried. If her brew makes a child sick, Never mind if it's the river water to blame, she could be shut down, publicly humiliated. Or worse, you realize something uncomfortable as you sip tonight's batch. She walks a line that's thinner than thread, and it's entirely up to the moods of men lords, ale-tasters, villagers, whether she continues to thrive or is snuffed out with a careless shrug. Still, she jokes. When you ask what's in the ale this time, she winks. Oh, just the usual. Grains, hops, a trace of regret, a pinch of defiance. You can't tell if she's serious. That's kind of the point. There's one curious moment when she offers a mug to the village priest. He hesitates, accepts, drinks, compliments the warmth. Then, as he leaves, you hear him mutter something about worldly indulgences and temptation. She rolls her eyes so hard you worry they might get stuck. This was always the tension. Ale was necessary but suspicious. It was daily but indulgent. It was safe but vaguely sinful. And when a woman brewed it, well, double the suspicion, triple the gossip. And yet, she continues. You help her scrub the cauldron as the last guests leave. The stone floor is warm beneath your feet, the embers fading to ash. She hums an old drinking tune under her breath as she stacks the mugs upside down. Her cat yawns and curls into the still warm grain sack, tail twitching like it's dreaming of Mysore vengeance. You stand in the doorway for a moment. The village is quiet. Stars blink overhead, bright enough to see by. Somewhere another Alewife is probably hanging out her broom, checking her stock, muttering at her own cat. And tomorrow she'll do it again, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because the village expects it tanned, because someone has to make the good stuff. You step out into the dark, the taste of barley still on your tongue, and realize this wasn't just brewing. It was a battle, fought quietly, daily, over cauldrons, and cups, and unfair rules, and somehow, against the odds, she's still winning. Morning comes slowly, dragging a pale, misty light across the fields. Chickens squabble near the door, and the cat already awake, of course sits like a sentry atop the empty grain bin, tail twitching. You stretch, blinking the sleep from your eyes, and step back into the brew hut. She's already stoking the fire, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, humming something tuneless, that the steam rising from the pot isn't just barley and water, it's a potion of purpose. And right now, it's also a little bit of damage control. Because last night, someone drank too much and sang a rude song about the Reeve's daughter. Loudly, guess who I'll be apologizing to before noon, she mutters. You start to realize that brewing ale wasn't just a job, it was also a social tightrope. One batch too strong, and half the village ends up fighting over a spilled cup. Too weak, and they grumble you're cheating them. A little too popular, and suddenly the baker's wife is accusing you of enticing her husband with unnatural smiles. You begin to see why the alewife's reputation often walked hand in hand with scandal in the songs of the time, some of which you hear muttered by passing minstrels. The alewife is a figure of ridicule, loud, greedy, tipsy, scheming. There's a particularly rude one involving an alewife, a leaky keg, and a goose. But we'll keep this PG and leave that to your imagination. Historians still argue whether these images were satire, warning, or just thinly veiled misogyny dressed as humor, probably all three. What's clear is that for every alewife stirring a pot with skill and care, there was a chorus of voices mocking her, mistrusting her, or treating her like a punchline. And yet the village still came. Every day you watch her press a fresh sprig of mugwort into a bundle of groot. Makes it bitter, she says, but bitter's honest. She laughs at that, then gets serious. But they'll call it poison if they don't like me that week. She's not exaggerating. Charges of selling corrupt ale were common, and sometimes deadly serious. In some towns, if your brew was blamed for illness or just didn't taste quite right, too, could be fined, shamed, even jailed. One alewife in London, circa 1370, was accused of selling ale not fit for a dog to drink. That wasn't a metaphor. That was the official charge. And no one asked the dog's opinion, so the alewife has to be cautious, not just with her recipes, but with her expressions, her posture, her tone. If she laughs too loudly, she's brazen. If she's quiet, she's cold. If she complains about her taxes, ungrateful. If she doesn't, greedy. You help her clean a stack of cups, each one slightly different, as if they were borrowed and never returned. That one's from Henna, she says. Took my cup, left hers. Typical. There's a comfort in the routine. Scrub, rinse, stack. But beneath it, you sense a low thrum of vigilance. She's always listening to footsteps, to gossip, to silence that stretches a little too long, and then it happens. A boy rushes in, panting, waving a scrap of parchment. He delivers it with wide eyes and a dramatic gasp, like he's expecting fireworks. She unfolds it, reads, and exhales through her nose. It's a summons, she says. Reeve wants to speak about my measuring cups. Apparently, someone has accused her of overfilling nor underfilling the standard pint. Again, there's no evidence, of course. But the complaint alone means she has to appear, answer, prove her honesty, or pay a fine. You ask if she's worried. She shrugs. Depends if his wife's still cross with me. There's something exhausting about it all. The constant negotiation, the impossible balance between being useful and being liked. She brews, she serves, she feeds, but the second something goes sideways, she becomes a symbol of something people don't quite trust. A woman with power. However small, you offer to walk with her to the Reeves Manor. She declines. You stay and watch the pot, she says. Just don't stir counterclockwise, it upsets the yeast. And with that, she wraps her shawl, sets her jaw, and heads out. While she's gone, the brew boils gently, the steam curling like a whisper. The cat hops onto the windowsill and stares at you like it knows something you don't. You stir clockwise, very carefully, and wonder how many times she's done this dance, how many mornings she's brewed with a fine hanging over her head, how many nights she's laughed with villagers who would turn on her by sunrise, how many cups she's poured for the same people who'd call her a fraud if the flavor shifted by a hair. Still, she returns. Later, the door creaks open, and she steps in, cheeks flushed. To pennies, she says, and a warning. She pulls off her shawl, hangs it on the peg, and starts washing her hands like she's scrubbing off the whole morning. You pour her a cup. She takes it with a weary nod and sits down on the bench by the hearth. The fire pops. The cauldron hisses. She closes her eyes for just a second. Then, well, she says, better brew something really nice tomorrow. Keep guessing. And she smiles, because even with the slurs, the inspections, the fines, and the bad rhymes, she's still here, still stirring, still standing. A woman with barley under her fingernails and smoke in her hair, daring anyone to take the ladle from her hands. The next batch is different. You don't notice at first, but she moves a little slower this morning, less from fatigue, more from something you can't quite name. Not fear, not yet, but something close. Her fingers hover longer over each herb. Her nose lingers in the steam longer than usual. Even the cat is quiet, curled near the fire, not pretending to help. You ask what's changed. She says nothing, just nods at the stack of copper pennies on the table. 3 of them. That's what she has left after paying the fine. Not enough for good malt, she mutters. So I'll make do. Making do in this world is an art form. It means using whatever barley hasn't been eaten by mice. It means scrubbing the cauldron extra hard so nothing sticks or spoils. It means boiling just a little longer to stretch out the bitterness, but it also means risk. When the ale is poor, people notice, and when people notice, they complain. And when complaints stack up well, you know the rest. Still, she brews, and it's that stubbornness, borderline heroic, definitely tragic, that draws you closer to her world. Because today, she isn't just brewing to earn. She's brewing to survive. That's when you hear about Hertha, other alewife, not Henna or Marta, someone new, someone from the next village over. A younger woman, married, charming, with a perfect braid and a recipe that's gone viral in a very 14th century kind of way. Her brew, they say, is lighter, her kitchen cleaner, her husband very supportive. Of course, you see it in the alewife's eyes. She tries not to let it show, but it's there, the sting of being replaced. Not because your ale's worse, but because your life doesn't look as tidy. No husband to vouch for your virtue. No market cart painted in cheerful colors. Just sweat, cats, and a broom that's seen better days. Let her have the fancy cups, the alewife mutters. Let's see how she handles a bad barley year. But, deep down, you sense the pressure. It's not just about brewing anymore. It's about optics, charm, marketability. You suddenly realize she's not just fighting against regulations and taxes. She's fighting the slow, creeping sense that she's being squeezed out of her own trade. Historians still argue whether this slow transition from household brewing to commercial brewing was a natural evolution or a systematic push to marginalize women in profitable trades. But you're standing in the center of it now, and it doesn't feel accidental. It feels like erasure. She sends you to fetch water while she grinds the last of the dried herbs. The well is quiet. You pass neighbors who nod politely but don't stop, not like they used to. You feel the shift, subtle but sharp. When you return, you see her speaking to someone at the door. A man in a long coat with a seal stitched onto his sleeve. A guild inspector. He isn't smiling. You catch the tail end of the conversation. Just standard checks, he says. All registered brewers are being visited, especially independents. She nods, says nothing, closes the door behind him like she's trapping in smoke. First, it's inspections, she mutters. Then it's forms I can't read. Then it's licenses I can't afford. You're about to ask something when she cuts you off with a sigh. Never mind, pass me that nettle bundle. You do. It smells sharp and green, like something wild. She tosses it into the boiling mash, like she's throwing in a dare. The truth is, ale was never just a drink. It was food. It was medicine. It was communion. gossip, ritual, and warmth. And now it's becoming business. And that changes everything. You sit and watch her work in silence, the firelight casting shadows across her face. She's still strong, still steady, but you wonder how many more inspections she can take, how many more fines, how many more perfect braid alewives showing up with smiling husbands and embossed mugs. Later that evening, the village holds a feast, a wedding, maybe, or a harvest festival. You lose track. The alewife is invited, of course, but not as a guest. She brings 2 barrels of her latest brew, wheels them out herself, gets only nods in return. The men go straight for the cups. The women whisper. Someone jokes about the witches. Kiss in her ale. And the group laughs too loud. She pretends not to hear, but you hear. You see it all, the way she stands apart, the way her contribution is consumed but not acknowledged, the way her presence feels necessary and invisible all at once. Still, they drink, and still she serves. At the end of the night, when the barrels are dry and the stars are out, she lingers behind to collect her empty mugs. Someone's left a smear of honey cake inside one. Another is cracked. She carries them home in silence. Back in the hut, she stacks the cups, feeds the fire, sits without speaking. You want to tell her something comforting, maybe, but what? That the future will remember her. That the brewing books of tomorrow will footnote her existence in italics. She wouldn't care. What matters is this: tomorrow she wake before dawn. She scraped the mash, measured the water, and brew again, not for glory, not for approval, but because it's what she does, because it matters, because no one else will. You wake to rain, not a storm, just the kind of persistent gray drizzle that turns roads to soup and moods to porridge. Outside, the thatched roofs weep quietly. The cat refuses to leave the hearth. Sensible dot inside the brew hut. The air is thick with warm grain and something gentler. Cinnamon, no just dried elderflower. She's experimenting today, not for profit, not for novelty, but because the shepherd's daughter down the lane has been coughing again, and this herb might ease her chest if it ends up in the ale. All the better you offer to help. She hands you a mortar and pestle and tells you to pretend you know what you're doing. You do badly. As you work, she talks softly, but not to you, more like to the room, or the rafters, or the fire, about how last winter she traded 6 pints of ale for a sack of onions when the roads were blocked. How a tired widow gave her dried apples in exchange for 2 mugs and a warm seat. How her ale helped an old man sleep again after his wife passed. You can't tax that, she says. You can't regulate kindness. But they try. Because not every exchange is about coin, and not every alewife is trying to be a merchant. Some of them, like her, have simply become the village's softest safety net, accidental therapist, cook, and healer, wrapped into one apron. And when times get hard, her hut becomes more than a brewery. It becomes a shelter. You see it later. That day, the door creaks open and a woman steps in, soaked to the skin, clutching a baby. No words, just shivering. The alewife moves instantly. Towel, stool, mug of weak, warm ale, sweetened with something brown and sticky. Honey, the baby cries. The woman weeps, and she sits there quietly, just letting it happen. This, you realize, is the unrecorded part of history. Not kings and wars and treaties, but moments like this. When someone bruised and weathered finds warmth in a stranger's hut, historians still argue whether these domestic spaces, these informal female-run havens, deserve the same scholarly focus as churches or markets. You sit here, watching her mop the floor with a ragged cloth and hum a lullaby she pretends not to know. And you want to yell, of course they do. When the rain slows, the woman leaves, quieter now, baby sleeping. The alewife waves her off with a whispered reminder to send a carrot or two when she's able. Later, a boy arrives with a chicken under one arm. The exchange is clear. 1 chicken, 3 cups of ale, and a place by the fire for his grandfather. Next week, you scribble mental notes as the day rolls by. Ale as currency, ale as medicine, ale as memory. No wonder the records don't capture it. It's not just subversive, it's quietly subversive. It doesn't shout, it simmers. Even a bit of spiritual comfort to it. After all, monks weren't the only ones with recipes. Before male brewers took over the brewing halls, alewives were making what they called blessed cups, small batches steeped with herbs meant to ward off fevers or lift melancholy. Was it science? Was it faith? Does it matter? You ask her. If she believes in any of it, she shrugs. I believe in hot mugs and full bellies. Good answer. She hands you a steaming cup. This one's smoother, paler, brewed from the last of her better barley. It tastes nostalgic, like something you didn't know you missed. Reminds me of my mother, she says. She taught me the rhythm. Left hand on the cauldron, hand to stir, never the other way around. You nod. You've never met her mother, but you already believe she was a force of nature. The kind of woman who could bake, brew, bless, and scold all before breakfast. You sip again. The flavor lingers like a memory. The cat finally moves, stretching like a lazy god before hopping into your lap and making himself your problem now. You accept it. There's a long pause then, the kind that only happens when work is done and no one feels the need to fill silence with noise. The fire cracks, the wind hums at the window, and the alewife closes her eyes, not asleep, just resting between battles, because tomorrow will bring more visitors, more trade, more scrutiny, and more chances to quietly prop up a village that doesn't even realize how much it leans on her. You wonder if the villagers even think about it. How many of them see her as a fixture, like the well or the smithy or the church bell? Something comforting, yes, but also silent, taken for granted. And if she were gone, you glance at the stacked cups, the bundled herbs, the simmering cauldron. You try to imagine it all cold, quiet, empty. It feels wrong, because this isn't just a place that makes ale, it's where someone remembers your name, where someone knows how you take your mug, where someone notices when you don't show up and asks why. Tomorrow, she'll wake again, stir again, brew again, for pennies, for chickens, for secrets and sorrow, and sometimes just because. But tonight, she rests, one hand curled near the hearth, the cat purring like a distant drum, and you, still holding a warm cup, beginning to understand what real hospitality smells like. By morning, the sky is clear, again washed pale blue, like someone rinsed it carefully in rainwater and hung it to dry. The roads are still muddy, but the sun has that sleepy warmth that tricks you into thinking the day will be gentle. It won't be. You step outside to fetch kindling, and that's when you hear it. Voices. low at first, but rising like heat. You round the corner and see two men in tight cloaks, their boots far too clean for anyone local. They're not from here. Their accents are flatter, and their smiles too practiced. You catch one phrase, unlicensed product, then another, unregulated sale. It's the alewife, standing with her arms crossed and chin high, does not flinch. The men introduce themselves. Fish. They say inspectors, representatives of the crown, here to check records, test batches, ensure quality. Standard procedure, they claim. No need to worry, she sighs. Inside, you brew quietly while they inspect everything, her measures, her dried herbs, her battered brewing book filled with shorthand only she can read. They sniff her mash, poke at her yeast, mutter about sanitation. One of them points at the broom by the door and chuckles, still with the witch sticks, She doesn't laugh. After half an hour of scraping, tapping, and they leave. No fines, this time, just a stern warning and a promise to return with guidelines. You know what that means: regulations, paperwork, requirements she may never meet. They're not here to help, they're here to pave the road for someone else, someone newer, someone cleaner, someone not her, back by the fire. She peels potatoes with short, irritated strokes. Funny, isn't it? She says. When the plague came, no one cared about licenses. When the river froze, no one checked my cups. You ask her what she'll do, she doesn't answer. Instead, she tells you a story about another alewife years ago. Her cousin, maybe, or a neighbor. It's hard to tell. She made a strong brew strong enough that the scribe fell asleep in a ditch and missed his own wedding. The priest called it a sin. Her name disappeared from the tax rolls a week later. You blink. What happened to her? Who knows, she says. But she didn't brew again. This isn't paranoia. This is pattern. It's a quiet squeeze. Dramatic, just rules upon rules until you can't breathe. And if you speak up, suddenly your cauldron's suspect, your cat ominous, your smile deceptive. Historians still argue whether the systematic exclusion of women from trades like brewing was coordinated or coincidental, whether the guilds simply forgot to include them or intentionally pushed them out as profits rose. Either way, the result was the same. You help her clean after lunch. The cauldron is stubborn today. The fire refuses to catch. The cat won't stop staring at a beam of sunlight like it's trying to remember how the world used to feel. A boy comes by to ask for ale. She tells him gently that she's out. He doesn't question her, just nods and walks away. Later, when you ask if that was true, she shrugs. No, but I didn't like his father's tone last week. A small rebellion, maybe. Or just self-preservation. That evening, the villagers gather in the square. A bard has arrived with a broken lute and a satchel of rumors. He sings a new song, sharp and clever. It's about a witch who brews ale so strong it steals your soul. The punchline. The witch has a crooked nose and a broom that talks. You can feel the villagers glance sideways at her. She smiles through it, doesn't blink, offers the bard a mug even. He takes it, drinks it, compliments her strength. She replies, "Careful, it might help you hit the right notes for once." A few people laugh, not many. You begin to realize she's not hated, but she's not embraced either. She's useful, she's tolerated. She's seasonal, like snow, or bees, and that's dangerous, because usefulness fades. Tomorrow, a new brewer might arrive. one with clean shoes and legal parchment, one with branding, one who says all the right words and never, ever uses MUGWORT, and the village will smile and nod and sip because the ale tastes fresher or safer or modern. And they'll forget that, last winter, it was this woman's brew that got them through the worst of it. She sees it coming, you can tell, but she doesn't say it. She just brews, not defiantly, not desperately, just because that's what she does. When the last cup is poured that night, she lets the fire die down. The cat hops onto her lap. She strokes it absently, staring at nothing, and then she says something so quietly, you almost miss it. They'll miss me when I'm gone. But only once the ale runs dry. You sit in silence beside her. The fire crackles low. Outside, the village snores and stirs. Somewhere, a new brewer writes their prices in ink. But here, in this fading hut, the barley still bubbles. The alewife still watches, and tomorrow against all odds she brew again. By the time the barley fields begin to yellow with the whisper of autumn, the air in the brew hut feels thicker, not just from the heat of the cauldron, but from something unspoken. There's a heaviness in her movements now, not tiredness. Exactly. More like anticipation, the kind that settles before a storm. You're gathering wood when the bell at the church rings not its usual slow chime, but a sharp clang, 3 quick tolls. A town meeting. You walk with her along the mud-packed road. The villagers gather under the linden tree, their eyes brighter than usual. There's talk of new orders from the crown, new trade policies, new safety measures. One of the aldermen clears his throat and unrolls a stiff sheet of parchment. The proclamation is simple. From next season onward, all ale sold within the region must be produced by licensed brewers belonging to the officially sanctioned brewing guild. All sales must occur from approved premises. No home distribution, no doorstep mugs, no more broom signals. A cheer rises from a few of the wealthier merchants. You look at her. She says nothing. You already know what she's thinking. This isn't a tax or a fine or an annoying visit from the Alcester. This is the slow guillotine of regulation. A polite way of saying, you don't belong here anymore. You go home in silence. She doesn't light the fire that evening, just sits with a cold cup in her hands. The cat curled at her feet like a forgotten shoe. You know, she says, after a long pause, I never called it a business. Not once. Not even when I traded for onions or grain. It was just what I did. Ask what she'll do now. She shrugs. Maybe stop, maybe not. Maybe just keep going until they remember why they needed me in the first place. But you can tell something's cracking, not her will. That's solid as boiled stone. No, it's the world around her, bending in ways it never used to, making her smaller, less necessary. Historians still argue whether these guild rules were designed to eliminate competition or enforce quality. Some say they were inevitable just progress. Others whisper that they were the first steps in writing women like her out of economic life entirely. She doesn't care what the historians say. She cares about the fire that won't start and the cupboard with no honey left. Still, the next morning, she brews, and for a moment, everything is as it was. The smell of damp grain, the soft slosh of water, the way the sunlight hits the copper pot just right. She sings a little old tavern tune about a donkey that drank too much and woke up in a bishop's hat. It's terribly off-key. You laugh. She grins, and that's when someone knocks. It's the new brewer. Yes, that one, the one from the next village. The one with the clean boots and spotless fingernails. She smiles too widely, as if the air here offends her, but she's trying to be polite about it. I heard about the guild notice, she says. Just wanted to stop by. See if you might be looking too. I don't know. Retire. The alewife raises an eyebrow. Or, the woman adds quickly, partner up. You have such a rustic charm. People love that. We could call it a heritage blend. You provide the stories. I provide the bottling. You watch the alewife smile. It's not kind. She offers the woman a cup. The woman takes a sip, frowns slightly, tries to hide it. Interesting, she says. Bit bold. Good, the alewife says. It's not for children. There's a long silence. Then, I'll think about your offer, she says. Right after I bury this batch in the garden for 100 years and see if it ages better than your pitch. The woman leaves. You don't see her again. That night, the villagers gather once more, not in the square, but here, in the brew hut, not for protest or drama, just because. Word had spread. Maybe it was the last batch, maybe it wasn't, but they came. With turnips, firewood, stories, and dented cups. No one says much. They drink, they sit, they let the silence swell with something like mourning, or maybe gratitude, or both. She doesn't make a speech, she just brews. And when you ask if this will be the last time, she leans in close and says, you can't outlaw warmth, you can't license memory. And you sure as barley can't teach a pot to boil with paper. U.S.I.P. It tastes exactly like what the village will miss. And outside, the stars blink softly, unaware of the paperwork forming beneath them. You rise before dawn the next morning, not because you mean to, but because the sound of the ladle clinking against the cauldron has changed. It's more careful now, more deliberate. You peek out from your blanket to find her already halfway through her routine, grinding herbs, testing the fire, checking the grain like it's a sick child. She's learned to read without words, but this time the mood is different. There's no humming, no jokes about how the cat probably brews better ale in his dreams. Just focus, just motion. Like she's laying down a kind of quiet defiance. One last brew, not for sale, not for trade, not for anyone else, just for her and you. She's already made the decision, though she hasn't said it out loud. This will be the final batch. Not because she wants it to be, but because the world outside has closed its doors. And she's not the sort to knock where she isn't wanted. Still, there's work to be done. She mixes the herbs carefully, mugwort, sage, a dash of something minty and bright. For the memory, she says, and the flavor. Might as well end with a good one. The water hisses as it hits the barley. The steam rises in soft coils, and for a moment the air in the hut smells like laughter and harvests and late autumn. Evenings when the whole village gathered around a fire, just for the joy of being close. She pours the mash through her old sieve. So old the handle's creaking. You can see her lips moving silently, counting time. Not by minutes, but by feel, by muscle memory. This isn't brewing, it's storytelling through steam. You notice something else, too. Her broom is gone. It's not hanging on the door like it always was. You ask, and she shrugs. Didn't see the point, she says. No one comes for the ale anymore. They come for the story. And stories don't need brooms. Outside, The new guild brewer has already set up a sign neatly painted, polished, letters, frothing, Finch ales, purity and tradition. There's a cart full of stamped mugs and a servant handing out samples. The villagers gather, murmuring approval. Tastes clean, someone says. You take another sip from the alewife's mug. It doesn't taste clean. It tastes alive. There's a knock on the door. You both look up. A girl stands there no more than 10, holding an empty cup with both hands like a church offering. She doesn't speak, just waits. The alewife smiles. Tell your mother, this one's on the house, she says, pouring a careful ladleful, and remind her to steep the elderflower for her cough, not just toss it in. The girl nods solemnly and runs off. You think, that's it. But more people come, one by one, quietly, without announcement. They don't form a line. They don't bring coin. Just faces you've seen around the village. Some smiling, some sheepish. All of them holding their oldest cups, ones they never quite threw out, just in case. She pours for each of them. No lectures, no bitterness, just warm mugs and short nods. You realize something then. They do remember. They remember who poured when their father passed, who brewed something special when the midwife came, who sat in silence when all you could do was cry into your stew. Her ale wasn't just drink, it was presence. Historians still argue whether the memory of alewives survived in fairy tale form, whether the broomstick and cat and cauldron were deliberate symbols of a female role too powerful to explain without fear. That maybe, just maybe, society turned her into a witch because it couldn't admit how much it owed her. She finishes pouring the last cup by dusk. You sit together in the doorway, watching the flickering lamplight of the village. The guild brewer's tent is folded now. The sign still stands, but it looks lonelier than before. She turns to you. They'll forget again, she says. Maybe in a week, maybe in a generation, but for tonight, they remembered. And that, she decides, enough. You help her clean, one mug at a time. No rush, no tears. The cat purrs and hops onto the bench like he knew this moment was coming. He probably did. Later, when the fires burned low and the last cup is dry, she says, there's a place down the coast, smaller village, less guild nonsense. I might go, or I might not. Might just plant barley until I forget what it was, ever. For you nod. You don't ask to go with her. She stands, stretches, and for one last time, places her hand on the doorpost where the broom used to hang. No farewell ceremony, no legacy speech, just one soft sentence, not bad for a witch. And she laughs. You wake later than usual. The next morning there's no clanging, no humming, no fire crackling in the hearth to pull you from sleep. Just sunlight, soft and golden, slipping through the cracks in the shutters like it knows it's trespassing. The brewhut is quiet, not empty, just resting. You stretch, roll off the straw mat, and glance around. The copper cauldron sits cool and dry. The herb bundles hang still. Even the cat isn't sprawled across the bench like usual. He's curled by the door, alert but relaxed, as if on lookout. She's not gone, not yet, but something has ended. The alewife sits outside under the old crabapple tree, her mug steaming gently in the chill air. She doesn't turn when you approach, just pats the spot beside her. You sit, no words for a while, just the rustling of dry leaves and the rhythmic clink of her spoon stirring the drink she made not for sale. not for trade, just to feel the warmth in her hands. You ask her if she brew again. She smiles, faint and crooked. Maybe, she says, but maybe not for them. Because the world that once came knocking at her crooked door now lines up at booths with banners and gold foil wrappers. Because somewhere along the way, ale stopped being comfort and started being product. And a woman with a ladle and a cat doesn't fit the brand. But here's what they'll forget. She was never just a brewer. She was the keeper of memories, of grief poured gently into a half mug, of celebration foamed over the rim of a cracked cup, of the way barley and water and time could pull you back from the edge of something sharp. You ask what she thinks of the guild brewer now. She shrugs. She'll do fine until winter, or until the crops go weird, or until the village remembers that sometimes people don't want perfect, they want familiar. Historians still argue whether alewives disappeared because they were pushed out, because they chose to stop, whether regulation killed them off, or whether they simply slipped sideways into history. Quiet as steam, she says. Neither is exactly true. They just stopped writing about us, she says. But we're still there, always were. You glance back at the brew hut. It leans a little to one side. The roof sags, and the chimney weeps. But it's still standing. You think of all the villages, all the kitchens, all the pots and cats, and stories no one ever wrote down, all the cups poured without ceremony, all the warmth traded for onions and silence. There are people still like her, maybe in towns where the roads aren't paved yet, maybe in city basements, maybe in kitchens where someone stirs something old and strange and doesn't bother explaining the recipe. You'll know them by the smell. You ask her what she'll do now. She says, rest. Maybe plant a garden. Maybe brew something that isn't for sale. You nod. And that night, as you help her sweep the floors one final time, she finds her broom again. Not the one that hung on the door. A smaller one, older. Its bristles bent like tired fingers. She laughs, shakes her head, and sets it in the corner. No more signals, she says. Let them knock if they remember how. You leave the next morning. She walks you to the edge of the path, hands you a jug filled with the last of the elderflower ale. For the road, she says. Don't share it. They won't understand it. And then she hugs you, just once, firm and brief, like someone setting a stone in the foundation of a home they'll never live to see. You walk away, and as you crest the hill, you look back. The hut is smaller now, a smudge in the gold of the morning fields. But if you listen carefully, if you close your eyes, you can still hear it. The slow stir of the ladle, the soft breath of the fire, the hum of a woman who was never really just a brewer. She was the keeper of the village's warmth, and long after the ale runs dry, her story lingers in the air, faint, fizzy, and just a little bit bitter. And now, as the night deepens and the air around you settles into stillness, let's leave the clink of mugs and the warmth of the hearth behind. The path is softer now. Beneath your feet, the earth cools. The stars, quiet and bright, peek gently between the leaves above you. You carry no lantern. You don't need one. The stories guide your steps behind you. The brew hut fades into memory, just another piece of forgotten history, waiting for someone to remember its shape. But something of it stays with you. Maybe it's the scent of barley and time still clinging to your clothes, or the soft hum of a tune without lyrics, echoing faintly in your mind. You walk slower now. The breeze that brushes your skin is gentler. The weight behind your eyes is heavier. The world hushes itself around you, as if the trees and stones and sky know you've had enough for one night. And you have. So go ahead, close your eyes, let your breath deepen, settle. Let the slow rhythm of forgotten footsteps and the warmth of a mug held in tired hands ease you into sleep. There's no rush. The story's done, and the alewife, she's still out there somewhere, stirring, smiling, waiting.